If you're a business owner and would like more information on sponsoring Geek Therapy Radio, just email geektherapy@iheartmedia.com or call 713-212-8422. And with that, meeting adjourned. Let's get our geek on.
High tech, low tech, or no tech. Through our hobbies and our passions, the geek comes out in us all.
The world's of geekdom.
I am a geek and I'm proud of it.
Geeks.
Geeks unite.
Let's get those nerds! Nerds! No!
Did you just call me a nerd?
Not all geeks are nerds.
Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger.
Welcome, one and all my geeks, all my geekettes, even though I don't really have to say geekette because geek is genderless. It was the original. 2017 was a weird year for genders. And I personally don't care. As long as you're a geek, you can identify yourself as a hermaphroditic Apache helicopter. You are welcome on Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, and I'm just gonna level with everybody this week. I've kind of put off recording the show this week because I don't really know how to approach it. For those keeping count, I believe this is the 1 year mark for Geek Therapy Radio. This is not episode 52, this is episode 50, but I think there were a couple weeks in there that I aired a best of or a rerun, or that the show got preempted for spurts. Anyway, so this is episode 50, but I believe, I'm looking back in the archives, I've got a folder marked March 1st, 2018, and I know that when the show is airing, it is March 4th, 2018. Sorry, the first show was March 1st, 2017. And honestly, when I put two and two together when doing show prep for this show, there is actual content in the show, don't worry. I thought I had more time because I was going to make the 1 year episode like just fabulous, and I think I'll still do that for the 52nd episode because that really is like 52 brand new weeks of Geek Therapy Radio. But what kind of put me out of it, put me in a weird mood, even though next Monday I do have a meeting with, a potential sponsor, and that's great. I had a sponsor before Hurricane Harvey, but Harvey happened, and I haven't heard from that gentleman anymore. I hope he's doing okay. But on Monday, I do have a meeting with a potential new sponsor for Geek Therapy Radio, so I am excited about that, and I thought I should be more excited with this show. But I'm dancing around the bush. Today's March 1st. Today's my dad's birthday. He would have been, I think he would have been 70 today. Yeah. He would have been 70 as of me recording this. I know you're listening to it March 4th, but as I'm recording this, it's March 1st, Thursday. And today would have been Dad's birthday. Pops behooved me not to get into radio, not to get into broadcasting. He didn't obviously forbid me to do it. For those of you who don't know, my dad was in the business for 30 years or so. He was an anchorman for everyone listening in Houston. He was an anchorman here in Houston. And since it's his birthday, and since this is the 1 year mark of Geek Therapy Radio, I'll just say his name. His name was Alan Hemberger. And he was, for almost 20, how long in Houston? 15 years or so? He was one of the top news anchors in the city. Local celebrity. So when I expressed my interest in getting into radio, that's where he got his start back in, I want to say late 60s, early 70s. He implored me to reconsider because obviously the ship has sailed as far as mass communications goes. As far as he would have rather all of his sons been accountants and architects and engineers and doctors and lawyers or whatever, just to have gone into a secure field, not radio, which is exactly where I went. I went into radio because honestly, you have to go where your passions are. And I developed a love for radio when I was in middle school, and I used to listen to Coast AM. Back then, it was Art Bell hosting Coast AM. And you know what's crazy? The voice you hear on the voiceover at the beginning of my show, at the beginning of Geek Therapy Radio, that voice is John B. Wells saying my name, saying a script that I wrote for him to say for the intro of my show. So when I first started listening to radio in middle school, because it might have been earlier than middle school, I couldn't sleep one night, so I was just scanning through the radio. I didn't want to hear music. I didn't want to hear sports. I just wanted to hear people talking. So, it was midnight 1 a.m., and of course, what's going on midnight 1 a.m. on the radio? It's Coast to Coast. At that time, it was with Art Bell. And the voice of Coast to Coast is John B. Wells. So it's all come around, and it's all reached a head here, March 1st, as I'm recording the show, that my dad's gone. He didn't want me to get into radio, but he did think it was pretty cool. And honestly, when he moved to California briefly before he died. He moved to San Diego, and he started doing just pro bono for free. After I got back into radio, he started hosting a few hours of radio in San Diego on the beach. There I'm blanking out on the name of the town. Why am I blanking out on the name of town? But you know what he said? It was a blues show that he hosted, and my dad freaking loved the blues, which is why I loved the blues. So he was hosting a show for a couple hours. It's like blues night, Friday night blues night or whatever with Alan Hemberger. Fully retired. He was just doing it for fun. And he started doing it after I got into radio. So I think even though he encouraged me not to get into radio, he thought it was cool. And I think he really accepted what I was doing. One night we were having a conversation on his balcony. Dana Point, California. That's it. I'm sorry, it just sparks in my brain. Dana Point is where he lived in San Diego. It's right on the beach. It was amazing. So we're having a discussion one night on the balcony, and he was giving me the business about, John, you're just, why you want to get into radio? There's no more money in radio. There never was much money in radio, for board ops, which is what I'm doing full time, in addition to this show, which is one reason I'm excited about my potential new client meeting on next Monday. He said, there's no money in it. And so I said, Pops, how much of my life are you paying for right now? What bills of mine are you paying for? And so my dad was very much a realist. He was very much about the quote-unquote, this is a word that is just burned into the flesh of my brain. He was all about the realities. So when I put it into realities terms, Pops, what of mine are you paying for? What part of, are you paying for my car insurance? Are you paying for my car? Are you paying for my rent? What are you paying for of mine? He just said, you're right. And I think that dawned on him that I was following my dream, and it didn't require any money out of his wallet. So I think that really sparked something in him again, briefly before he died, that, he'd go back to his roots in radio. So he said, it's a pretty sweet gig. He doesn't get paid. He was retired, but from sitting in front of the microphone, he could watch the waves crash on the Pacific Ocean. And it's kind of a poetic way to go out. So he didn't die behind the microphone. He moved to Cape Cod. His grand idea was to buy a house in Cape Cod, which he did, a fixer-upper. And we didn't know that he was going to pass away. And I'm sorry for any family members that might be listening to this, that might be jerking some tears. Honestly, this is why I struggled with doing this weeks. Even though it's the 1 year anniversary, it's just, it's all come together here. So anyways, he moved to Cape Cod, straight up Ernest Hemingway style, bought a house in Cape Cod, fixed it up, was fixing it up when he passed away. He passed away basically in the woods of Cape Cod, which is like, that's straight up glory days of English literature, of American literature. Not that he was writing a book or anything, but the way he passed away, he had just done his last beautiful stint in radio, watching the waves crash, playing blues music, after his son, one of his sons, decided to unofficially follow in his footsteps. I don't want to do exactly what my dad did. I have no desire to be an anchor man, to be a news anchor. I don't. I want to do my thing. I want to say what I want to say, and if there's any script written, I want it to be a script that I've written, or at least that I've gone over. And not that the news is bad. I mean, that anchors do write their own scripts. They write their own stories, and then the editor gets it and tightens it up and blah, blah, blah. Same in radio. That's the news editor's job. Everyone's editing their pieces. But, so yeah, I don't have a desire to be an anchor. And I just want to talk on the radio, honestly. I didn't know this first segment would be so intimate. But you're getting the full background as to why I got into radio. And I honestly, it's not because my dad did it. It's because I wanted to do it. And when I first applied, it was Clear Channel back in 2009 or 10, whenever I first applied. I did not put my dad on my resume. I didn't put him as a contact. I didn't use him as a reference. Not at all. I never brought attention to the fact, and it never came up in my interviews. Only later did people connect the dots that, was your dad Alan Hemberger? Yes. I wanted to do it on my own, to prove it to myself, to prove that I don't need, nepotism to get me into this business, and hopefully that I can make a good career out of this on my own 2 feet. Anyways, I know my dad thought that was cool. And let's get back to Cape Cod, where he bought his house in Cape Cod, and where he passed away. We think he obviously didn't plan on passing away at 65. But we suspect that maybe he knew that his days were brief. Because we think he was trying to set up this house to leave to his children. Because it was his dream to take the family back to Cape Cod, retire and take the family back to Cape Cod, have a house in Cape Cod that the family could come back to. And we didn't keep the house. It wasn't ready for that. But anyways, that's why I got into radio. John B. Wells, the guy I listened to growing up, is now doing the intro for Geek Therapy Radio. And that's pretty cool. So as I'm recording this March 1st, happy birthday, Pop. I hope you're proud. I know you are. And I know one day these signals will reach heaven. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. It's me, Johnny Hemberger, your mental curator. This evening, this afternoon, this morning, whenever you're listening to Geek Therapy Radio, whether it's the broadcast right here on KPRC 950 AM in Houston, or the podcast, which is digitally broadcast globally. It's not technically a broadcast, it's just ones and zeros in the worldy pipe, the internet, the interwebs. So if you haven't already, if you're just stumbling across this show, if you're just stumbling across Geek Therapy Radio, you're listening to it in podcast form, subscribe to it. If you're listening to it on the iHeartRadio app, and the iHeartRadio app, I know it asks you to sign up. You can listen to stations for free, like live, but to download podcasts and listen to music and all sorts of stuff, make your playlist and music, you got to sign up for it. But it takes like 10 seconds. It's just use a junk throwaway email account and make up a password. Done, you're in. You've got an iHeartRadio account. So get the iHeartRadio app, or you can even log in on PC. Just use some email address and a password, and you're in. Point is, subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm not going to beg you. I'm not going to make you. I'm not a cop. I'm not a beggar. But it'd be pretty cool if you subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio on the iHeartMedia app. And now that I've given the iHeartMedia app a full minute, you can also subscribe on Spreaker. You can also subscribe on iTunes. They don't like me saying that, but it's iHeartMedia content that you're consuming. So any way you subscribe to the podcast through whatever app, whatever service you use, I think it's on Podbean or BeanPod or whatever it's called, all Stitcher, it's all over the place. Just subscribe to it. Subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio, and you're helping out. You're helping me out, but you're helping iHeartMedia out, of course, too. So whether you're subscribing to the iHeartRadio app or any outlet for podcasts, you're helping me out, you're helping the company out, you're helping keep content like this flowing. The greatest content. So, subscribe. GeekTherapyRadio.com is a good way to get in touch with me. There's a form on there that you can tell me what you're a geek about, or you can tell me whatever you want to tell me. You can tell me I suck. Tell me about some factual errors that I made. Like I've said so many times in the show, one of the mission statements on the show is that, you know, we're all geeks about something, and we're all supposed to help each other out with our geek knowledge. So if I or somebody on the show says something that you know more about, or that you know what was said on the show was not entirely accurate, GeekTherapyRadio.com, go to the contact page or whatever, and just tell me. Let me know. You can even email geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. You can even get at me. Facebook, Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Geek Therapy Radio on Instagram, Geek Therapy KPRC on Twitter. But honest to God, the easiest way is geektherapyradio.com. Easiest way to get in touch with me. Johnny Hemberger, mental curator, as John B. Wells says at the beginning of each show. All right, like I mentioned in the first segment, I do have actual topics that I'm going to rephrase this. I do have actual topics that I can get to. But honestly, on this 1-year anniversary mark of Geek Therapy Radio, I just feel like talking. And if you'll allow me, I'll just going to keep talking. And I would like to go back to things surrounding, stories surrounding my dad. Because if you missed the first segment, if you're just joining us here, you're listening to the broadcast on KPRC 950. First segment, I mentioned, it's my dad's birthday as of me recording this. March 1st, 2018. My dad was born March 1st, 1948. And already that rings bells in my geek brain. I forget at what point, maybe as a teenager. It's like, 1948? That's when the Tucker came out. The Tucker automobile, which was way ahead of its time. And welcome to Geek Therapy Radio, where we go down rabbit trails. The Tucker was a car way ahead of its time, and there's maybe a handful of Tuckers ever, not handful, there's a few dozen, 40 or 50 Tuckers ever made. And it's, ever since I got the DeLorean, the Tucker has been close to my heart. I will never in my life be able to afford a Tucker. They're so rare and they're so expensive. And honestly, I don't have a huge desire to own one. I would like to see one, maybe ride in one in my life. I don't have a desire to own it. But the Tucker and the whole Tucker story has been close to my heart because I have a DeLorean. Because the story of Tucker and DeLorean is very similar. What was the guy's name? His last name was Tucker, obviously. What was his first name? I refuse to Google it. But Tucker and John DeLorean both had similar dreams. They both did not like the way the big three auto companies were producing cars. They did not like the way that, GM and Ford and all of them, Chrysler, were trying to sell you brand new cars, quote unquote, every year that weren't brand new. They just had subtle styling changes. They wanted you to shell out a healthy portion of your salary for a car that was no different than last year's car. So Tucker and John DeLorean, when they made their first cars, they said, this is the car that's going to last you for years. For DeLorean, the DMC-12 was touted as, advertised as the ethical sports car. It was supposed to be the ethical sports car for a few reasons. One, gas mileage. DeLoreans actually get a side effect of the wimpy engine in there is that they get decent gas mileage, around 30 on the highway, which is pretty good for the early 80s. Late 70s when it was developed. The reason why there's stainless steel is because there was no paint to chip and no body to rust. The idea was you're supposed to buy the DeLorean DMC-12 and maintenance would be very low on the body and anything else on the car. Now, you could argue with the DeLorean that maybe it wasn't the most reliable, and that's part of the myth about DeLoreans. The first batch of DeLoreans that rolled off the boat did have problems. It was the alternator. The first batch had a tiny alternator that could not keep the battery charged while the lights were on. So you had very infamous stories of people receiving their DeLorean, Johnny Carson and who other guy in the Rat Pack, Sammy Davis Jr., getting stranded on the LA freeway because their DeLoreans broke down. And it was because the alternator wasn't big enough for the initial batch of cars that first shipped. Alternator wasn't big enough to keep the battery charged. So the car broke down. But after the first batch, that issue was fixed. They put larger Motorola alternators in there, and that wasn't an issue. DeLoreans are the massive bulk of them. Out of the 9,000 made, there's an estimated over 7,000 or so still around today. The rest are likely hidden in barns and on back lots somewhere, collecting dust or overgrown with weeds. But the lion's share of DeLoreans that were ever produced in their short run are still registered and on the road today. It's not the fastest car in the world. It was supposed to be the ethical sports car. So, John DeLorean had his thing. He tried to go against the big three with his vehicle. Tucker did the same thing. I don't know all the details on the Tucker. It did use a helicopter engine. That's one area where I've had people at gas stations, so to speak, and for instance, come up to me in my DeLorean and say, "It's got a helicopter engine in there?" No. It's got a Peugeot Renault Volvo V6. The Chrysler used that engine in whatever vehicles until the early 90s. PRV V6 is used in millions of cars. It's not a helicopter engine. The helicopter engine was in the Tucker. So when Tucker went up against the big three, he suffered a similar but far worse fate. Actually, that's not entirely true. But Tucker suffered a similar fate to John DeLorean in that his car company failed. And there's the same conspiracy theories out there that maybe it just failed because Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors did not want a fourth in the competition. Because the Tucker was very advanced. The Tucker did have safety features pretty advanced for the time. One of them was kind of stupid. In the passenger footwell, like the front passenger side footwell, it was designed for you to tuck into in the event of a wreck. It was reinforced, and it was built to accommodate the size of a full-grown adult huddled inside of it like a tiny little bomb shelter, which is ridiculous if you think about it. Because that assumes that you see the wreck about to happen with enough time to get out of the seat and tuck yourself up underneath the wheel well. And if accidents happened with that much advanced warning, there would be no accidents. But it was just funny that a safety well, a safety cage you can crawl into in the event of a wreck. Did any Tuckers ever get into a wreck? They didn't make enough of them. I've never read about any Tucker being involved in a car accident, because that would be news. Because there aren't a lot of Tuckers, and one bite in the dust would be very newsworthy. Anyways, 1948, March 1st, that's when my dad was born. That's what got me off onto that Tucker DeLorean tangent, because that's what we do here on Geek Therapy Radio. Like I mentioned, I do have topics that I can get to, and in the last segment at least, I will touch on a few of them. But I just wanted to use these segments to just talk. Just to talk and reminisce. Mostly about my pops, because it's his birthday as I'm recording this. I remember growing up, this segment's almost over, but I remember growing up that if we broke a window, me or one of my three brothers broke a window or just broke anything, we'd get the business from my dad, as any child would. They'd get punished. What were the circumstances behind the thing breaking? Probably you being stupid, doing something dumb, which, guess what? Yes, always it was the product of doing something dumb. Always. If your kid says, well, I was just... No, you're doing something dumb. I can say that now. I tried to use every excuse in the book growing up that it wasn't something dumb I was doing. I will confess, Mom and Pops looking down, I was doing something dumb. That's how the thing broke. But one time my dad did something dumb. We were playing catch in the backyard, baseball catch, because a football wouldn't do this damage, and he threw it. I guess he was trying to be all cool with it, and he threw it, and it ricocheted off a tree, and it smashed one of the windows in the house. And I remember as a kid being stunned. Who you gonna yell at, Dad? What do you do? We didn't break the window. It was like a paradox. Like, is my dad's head gonna explode because he doesn't know who to yell at? He just stood there with his mitt over his mouth, just in disbelief. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. I'm Johnny Hemberger. Stick around. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Johnny Hemberger, your mental curator. Thank you for joining me tonight if you're listening on KPRC 950. And if you're listening to the podcast, which I can't talk. I swear I've only had 3 sips of my tequila orange juice mix. But I can't talk. Sarah just glared at me. Not really. Anyways, Yeah, thank you for joining me. I told you, take me in the shower with you. You got your Bluetooth speaker, or you just put your phone down on the counter next to the shower? Take me in the shower with you. I know lots of you listening to me on the podcast, and I thank you very much. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're just stumbling on Geek Therapy Radio for the first time, hit the subscribe button and let me know what you're a geek about by going to geektherapyradio.com. In the contact section, you can fill out, just send me a message. You can also go Geek Therapy Radio where, babe?
Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah. Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook and Instagram. Oh, YouTube. I put videos up there. I just did an interview last week with Sam Battle from the popular YouTube channel Look Mum No Computer. He made that Furby organ that went viral last week or the week before last week. That's a really cool interview. So we do cool shows here on Geek Therapy Radio. So subscribe to the podcast. There's a backlog of, at this point, if you're listening to this show, there's 50 shows behind me right now. How many hours is that? That's like 40. You did something that just distracted me that I can't say on the radio. So it's probably, about 50 hours worth of content back there. That's like 2 days. That's like 2 days of just pure Geek Therapy Radio. 2 days is 48 hours. I digress. But just go to geektherapyradio.com or Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, all the social media, and let me know what you're a geek about. That's what I'm saying here, is you've just stumbled on this show, subscribe, and let me know what your geek thing is. It could be barbecue, or as I like to say, barbecue. It can be art, cars, or art cars, electronics. It could be, anything's Legos. One of the things I say on the show all the time is, you're a grown-ass man or woman. Go buy some Legos on the way home from work. You know you've been thinking about it. And instead of Legos, insert any other toy that you might have dabbled in thinking about. You may have gone to Walmart or go grocery shopping. And you're like, that little toy car looks neat. Just buy the car. Sarah, stop glaring at me.
You did that today at the grocery store.
We were at Randall's earlier, near the cheese section or whatever. And Sarah's like, babe? I was like, what? Because apparently I got distracted. I was looking at all the little die-cast model cars. I was scanning through them to see if they had any, rare models in there. Like one... Yeah. I got one... I found an R8 in there once. I found a Lotus Esprit in there. And here's my point. Oh, jeez, here we go. Jack the cat is crying. Anyways, all I'm saying is, next time you're at Randall's or you're at the store and you've always been debating, I don't want to get that thing, that toy, or I don't want to, get back into my old hobby because I'm an adult now and I have got a real job. We all have jobs. We all have things that have distracted us from our hobbies and our passions as our life matures. So there's absolutely no problem if, for instance, you like Legos like my buddy. If you were super into Legos growing up and for some reason you fell out of it, but now as an adult you catch yourself thinking about Legos once in a while and then you poo-poo on yourself because, not for any weird fetish, but you poo-poo on yourself to say, I'm not going to get Legos, that's for kids. No, it's not. Go buy some Legos on your way home from work today. Pause this podcast. Bluetooth your phone into your car stereo. Resume the podcast. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Are you going to get Legos yet? Are you going to the hobby store to get a remote control airplane yet? Are you going to the hobby store to get your easel and to get art supplies yet? Do it. Just do it and spend 5-10 minutes this week indulging in one of your old hobbies, or maybe just some hobby or geek thing that you've recently been interested in. Maybe you've been all over YouTube, like going down the rabbit trail of videos about, or like Bob Ross. So go to the art store and buy some watercolors and a canvas. What's stopping you from doing it other than finances? And a canvas and some watercolors ain't that expensive. A little Lego set ain't that expensive. A big old freaking Death Star like Buddy has, that is expensive. But Buddy is just a turbo nerd when it comes to Legos. I remember one time I asked him, I said, so when you build these things, do you add a little dab of super glue to each piece to keep it? He about ripped my throat out. No, that is sacrilege. It's like, what if it falls and breaks? He's like, then you have the fun of putting it back together again. It's like, okie dokie. Which I can relate to, because when electronics break around my habitation, it's like a fun challenge. Like, oh, I get to fix something now. Neat. So I guess when his son inevitably knocks one of his Lego creations, one of his father's Lego creations off a shelf, Buddy's probably going to have a good time rebuilding it with his son. And Buddy, I know you're listening, and I know you can't wait to build Legos with your son. I can't wait to build Legos with my kids one day. My firstborn son will be named Malcolm. We were getting way ahead of ourselves here. But what was the first daughter's name going to be if we had a daughter? And if it's with you? Sophie. Malcolm and Sophie. I am putting the cart like
Way ahead of it.
in the other hemisphere. Anyways, okay. Real stuff here. My buddy James Sheehan, who I've had on the show in the past, musician, actor extraordinaire. He has his first show coming up March 11th at Warehouse Live in the studio room. So Sunday, March 11th, Warehouse Live in the studio room. You can hear my buddy James. He goes by Jaime. That's his musician name. That's his group name. That's his band name, even though it's just him right now, which is perfectly fine. Jaime, Sunday, March 11th, Warehouse Live at 6:30 p.m. So 6:30 p.m., Sunday, March 11th, Warehouse Live in the studio room. You can see my buddy Jaime, Jyme. And if you want more information on Jaime, just go to jaime.club, jyme.club, jaime.club, jyme.club, and go show him some support. I haven't texted him yet, but I can't go to the show. I've got what do you call it? I'm all booked up on that Sunday. So sorry, James, I can't go to the show, but I will go to a future one, I promise. And I knew I would make good on this by prior engagement, thank you. I have a prior engagement on Sunday all day. So, James, I can't go to the show. Hopefully I can get some listeners going to the show. Go show my buddy James some support. Jaime, again, jaime.club, playing his premiere show, Sunday, March 11th, Warehouse Live Studio Room, 6:30 p.m. I was going somewhere with this segment. Like, there was a point that I wanted to get to in this segment, and I've completely forgot it. I think once I started talking about having kids, I just completely blanked out. I know, see, here's the thing. We men know we're capable of planting a seed, but it takes...
What is in that drink?
Tequila is in the drink. But it takes a real man to be a father, to be a dad. So that's what's daunting, and I think that's what's daunting to any man. It's not getting someone pregnant. There's plenty of animals out there that just knock up women left and right. Baby daddies. Knock it off. My goodness. Why? That's a whole mentality that I never in my life will ever be able to wrap my head around. I had a guy I worked with one time when I worked at Sherwin-Williams. I love Sherwin-Williams. Sherwin-Williams is such a good company. Sherwin-Williams was the first job that I would go to that I didn't regret waking up and going to. That I didn't wake up thinking, oh crap, I gotta go to work today. Sherwin-Williams is great. Paint company. Coatings company, technically. Coating. Because they will put a coat of paint on the side of a battleship. And that paint is like epoxy paint, and it is no joke. But I was working at Sherwin-Williams, and I had a coworker say, my girlfriend at the time, I think I was complaining about money or something like that. He's like, get your girl pregnant. Have kids. You get tax money back for that. It's like, are you serious, dude? Is that a real suggestion? Have kids and I'll get money from the government? It's like, yeah. So he believed it. It was dumb.
You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio.
Susie, don't worry. I know that last segment probably scared you. There's nothing to worry about. Like I said, that's putting the cart in the other hemisphere ahead of the horse. I love your daughter very much, but don't worry. Everything's fine. Everything's status quo. See you in a few weeks, right?
In June.
Oh.
I mean, the end of June.
Well, that's a few weeks. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. This episode, I think, is pretty unorthodox. And I did have topics, and this is the last segment of Geek Therapy Radio, so I will touch on some things. But again, Susie, Sarah's mother, don't worry. Everything's fine. Nothing's happening. Everything is cool.
Say Bobby also.
Bobby. I'm more afraid of, well, I'm equally, maybe slightly more afraid of you. Everything's fine. Sarah says edit this whole thing out. I'm letting it fly. I actually have geek topics to get to, and I will get to in this very short last segment of Geek Therapy Radio. The biggest thing I wanted to talk about this week was actually two things. One of them is actually a big thing. And by big thing, I mean a huge, giant airplane. The Stratolaunch, the gargantuan Stratolaunch dual fuselage airplane, has a wingspan of 380 feet. That's the biggest in the world. It's not flown yet, but it did complete its second successful taxi test that saw it hit 40 knots, which is roughly 45, 46 miles per hour, as it sped down the runway in Mojave, California. 385-foot wingspan. That's crazy. Go Google Stratolaunch. STRATO. Launch. The world's largest plane did its second successful taxi test. This plane, I got the hiccups. This plane is designed to launch spacecraft into orbit. Basically, plane's gonna bring the rocket close to the edge of space, halfway there, basically, more than halfway there. And it's gonna drop the vehicle out from underneath the plane, and the plane's going to basically rocket the rest of the way to space. It's going to save fuel. It's going to be cost efficient. You're not launching Falcon 9 Heavies out of this thing, but you're launching smaller vehicles into space much more efficiently. And the way I'm thinking it could be used would be for public, civilian space travel. The Concorde could get from New York to London in, 2 hours or something like that. 2 or 3 hours, less than half the time it takes a normal jetliner. So the Stratolaunch, let's say it launches a civilian vehicle into space. Maybe you can get to New York in an hour, 30 minutes. I got to work on the math on that because it seems like it takes a long time for you to reach cruising altitude in a jet airliner. So, it takes a 30 minutes. And what's the average time to reach cruising altitude in a 747, like intercontinental trip from Houston to Heathrow? You're probably at cruising altitude in about an hour. Don't quote me on that. Go to geektherapyradio.com and tell me how long it takes to reach cruising altitude in 747. I've been fascinated by the Stratolaunch plane for well over a year. It has been on my radar. Not that any radar in this system in the world would have a hard time picking up an airplane with a 385-foot wingspan, but it's got me geeking out aviation-wise for a year. Speaking of aviation, I want to get my pilot's license, but I can't ever bring Sarah up there with me. She gets nauseous driving up the parking garage to her apartment, so I don't think she's going to get in a little Cessna 150 with me. It's a trash can that tumbles through the sky. And not really tumble, it's flying, it's fine. I'll be happy and having fun, but it bounces around a lot. It is not a smooth and stable experience for the most part. Unless the wind is just perfect. You're cruising and it's just like great. But most of the time, it's just like being in a trash can 6,000 feet in the air. So I don't think Sarah would have a whole ton of fun with that. That's going to do it for Geek Therapy Radio. Thank you for bearing with me this week. I just wanted to spend the week reminiscing. Happy birthday, Pop. I'm recording this March 1st, 2018. He was born March 1st, 1948. Thank you for joining me on Geek Therapy Radio. I'm Johnny Hemberger signing out until next week. Join me for more GTR.
Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.